Chapter 1: The Heart of San Elroy. The sun cast a golden hue over the rolling hills as dawn broke over San Elroy. Nestled between the vast expanse of the desert and the gentle curves of the mountains, the small town stirred to life. Dusty roads wound through adobe houses painted in earthy tones, their terracotta roofs glowing warmly in the early light. The air was rich with the scent of mesquite and the distant melody of a guitar strumming an old folk tune. At the center of town stood La Paloma, a charming restaurant with white stucco walls and vibrant blue trim. Colorful papel picado banners fluttered in the morning breeze, casting dancing shadows on the cobblestone street below. Inside, the soft clatter of pots and pans mingled with the hum of a radio playing a timeless bolero. Maria Santiago moved gracefully through the kitchen, her hands deftly kneading dough for the day's fresh tortillas. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders in loose waves, framing a face that radiated warmth and quiet strength. Her emerald eyes reflected a depth of emotion, a silent story told through fleeting glances and soft smiles. The aroma of spices, cumin, oregano, and a hint of cinnamon filled the room, a testament to her culinary artistry. Hector Santiago stood at the large front window, polishing the glass until it gleamed. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard sprinkled with silver, he exuded a calm confidence. His eyes, the color of rich mahogany, surveyed the waking town with a sense of contentment. He turned back toward the interior, the morning light illuminating the rows of neatly set tables adorned with fresh flowers. "Buenos dias, mi amor," Hector called softly, his voice carrying the warmth of a shared lifetime. "Good morning," Maria replied, glancing up from her work. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustle of the world outside faded away. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection forged over years of shared joys and quiet sorrows. Hector walked over to the kitchen doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "The bread delivery just arrived. Fresh bolillos for the lunch crowd." Maria nodded appreciatively. "Perfect timing. I was just thinking about making tortas today." He watched her hands move methodically, the rhythm of her movements soothing in its familiarity. "You know, people say they can taste the love in your cooking," he remarked. She laughed softly. "Then I hope they come hungry." The bell above the restaurant door jingled as Father Miguel entered, his robes gently swaying. "Good morning, Hector." "Maria," he greeted with a jovial wave. "Father Miguel, welcome," Hector replied, extending his hand. "Coffee?" "Always," the priest chuckled. "I couldn't resist the smell of Maria's kitchen. It's a blessing and a temptation all at once." Maria wiped her hands on her apron and joined them. "Sit, Father. I'll bring you a cup." As she disappeared into the kitchen, Father Miguel leaned in toward Hector. "How are you both doing? We missed you at the community meeting last night." Hector sighed lightly. "Apologies, Father. The restaurant has been keeping us busy. But we're well. Grateful, as always." "That's good to hear," the priest replied, his eyes gentle but probing. "And Maria? She seems pensive lately." Hector glanced toward the kitchen, where Maria's silhouette moved behind the frosted glass. "She's been deep in thought, but she carries it with grace." Maria returned, carefully balancing a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a small plate of pan dulce. "Here you are, Father. Fresh from the oven." "You're too kind," he said, accepting the offering with a grateful nod. "The church is hosting a charity dinner next week. Your presence would be a blessing." "Of course," Maria replied, her smile genuine. "We wouldn't miss it." As Father Miguel sipped his coffee, the conversation drifted to lighter topics: the upcoming festival, the recent rains that had blessed the fields, and the subtle changes that each new day brought to their close-knit community. After the priest departed, the morning rush began in earnest. Locals and travelers alike filled La Paloma, drawn by the enticing aromas and the promise of a hearty meal. Hector moved effortlessly among the tables, greeting patrons by name, his laughter ringing out in response to shared jokes and stories. In the kitchen, Maria orchestrated a symphony of flavors. She tasted each dish with a critical palate, ensuring that every plate that left her domain was a testament to her passion. Despite the flurry of activity, she found moments to pause, her gaze occasionally drifting to the window where the desert horizon beckoned. As the midday sun climbed high, casting sharp shadows, the rush subsided. Hector joined Maria in the quiet of the kitchen, where the only sounds were the distant chirping of birds and the soft hum of the refrigerator. "Take a break," he suggested, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've been on your feet all morning." She leaned into his touch ever so slightly. "Maybe just a moment." They settled at a small table near the back door, where a gentle breeze carried a scent of blooming jasmine. Hector poured 2 glasses of chilled hibiscus tea, the deep crimson liquid catching the light. "Do you ever think about what lies beyond those hills?" Maria asked softly, her eyes fixed on the distant peaks. Hector considered her question. "Sometimes. But then I remember that everything I need is right here." She turned to look at him, a hint of sadness mingling with affection in her gaze. "You're content?" "I am," he replied earnestly. "We have each other, our faith, and a community that cares for us. What more could we ask for?" Maria smiled faintly. "You're right. We are blessed." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the unspoken words that often lingered at the edges of their conversations. Hector reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with hers. "If there's ever anything on your mind, you know you can share it with me." She squeezed his hand gently. "I know." The afternoon unfolded peacefully. Hector attended to the business side of the restaurant, reviewing invoices and planning for the week ahead. Maria immersed herself in preparations for the evening menu, experimenting with new recipes that blended traditional flavors with her own creative flair. As twilight approached, the sky transformed into a canvas of fiery oranges and deep purples. The church bells tolled softly in the distance, calling the faithful to evening mass. Hector and Maria closed the restaurant briefly, as they did every evening, to attend the service. The Church of San Elroy was a modest but beautiful structure, its white walls adorned with stained glass windows depicting saints and angels. Inside, candles flickered gently, casting a warm glow over the congregation. Seated side by side, Hector and Maria joined in the hymns, their voices blending harmoniously with those around them. Father Miguel delivered a sermon on the themes of gratitude and perseverance, his words resonating deeply within them both. After the service, they lingered outside the church, engaging in friendly conversations with neighbors and friends. Children laughed and played in the courtyard, their carefree joy a reminder of life's simple pleasures. "Maria, your tamales at last week's fundraiser were divine," Senora Alvarez gushed. "You must share your secret ingredient with me." Maria laughed lightly. "If I did, it wouldn't be a secret anymore." The group chuckled, and the conversation shifted to upcoming events and shared memories. Hector noticed Maria's gaze drifting once more toward the horizon, a contemplative expression settling over her features. As they walked home under a canopy of stars, Hector wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You're quiet tonight," he observed. "Just thinking," she replied softly. "About anything in particular?" She hesitated before answering. "About us. About the future." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Maria, is there something you want to tell me?" She looked into his eyes, the depth of emotion there was vast. "No, it's just. Sometimes I wonder if we're missing something." Hector's brow furrowed with concern. "What do you feel we're missing?" She shook her head gently. "Maybe it's nothing. Let's go home." He wanted to press further but decided against it. Instead, he pulled her closer, and they continued their walk in silence, the soft glow of their home's lights welcoming them from a distance. Back at La Paloma, they prepared for the evening diners. The atmosphere shifted as candles were lit on each table, and the soft strains of guitar music filled the air. The restaurant transformed into a haven of intimacy and warmth, a reflection of the love and care Hector and Maria poured into every detail. As the night unfolded, they moved in harmony, attending to guests and ensuring that each person felt like part of their extended family. Laughter and conversations ebbed and flowed, the clinking of glasses punctuating the melody of human connection. When the last guest had departed and the chairs were stacked atop tables, Hector and Maria sat together once more, sharing a late supper of simple fare, fresh bread, cheese, and olives. "Another good day," Hector mused, taking a sip of wine. "Yes," Maria agreed, though her tone carried a hint of melancholy. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Whatever it is that's on your mind, we'll face it together." She offered a small smile. "I know. Thank you." They lingered in the quiet of the night, the world outside slipping into slumber. The moon cast a silvery glow through the windows, illuminating the unspoken distance that seemed to have settled between them. As they prepared to retire for the evening, Maria paused at the foot of the stairs. "Hector," she began softly. "Yes?" She hesitated, then simply said, "I love you." "You too," he replied, sensing the weight of words left unsaid. In the solitude of their bedroom, Maria stood by the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of the desert under the starlit sky. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. Deep within her heart, a longing stirred, a delicate thread woven from hope and an unnamed ache. She clasped her hands together, whispering a silent prayer into the night. Behind her, Hector lay awake in bed, his thoughts mirroring her own uncertainties. He stared at the ceiling, the shadows casting shifting patterns that seemed to echo the complexities of their lives. Between them lay a quiet yearning, a space filled with love yet marked by the absence of something unspoken. As sleep finally claimed them, the town of San Elroy rested, unaware of the subtle currents that would soon ripple through the fabric of their close-knit community. Chapter 2: Whispered Longings. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the bedroom, casting delicate patterns across the tiled floor. Maria awoke to the gentle cooing of doves perched on the windowsill. She lay still for a moment, enveloped in the soft linens, her senses gradually attuning to the world around her. The scent of blooming roses from the garden below mingled with the crisp morning air. Hector was already up, the space beside her empty but still warm. She could hear faint sounds from downstairs, the clink of dishes, the murmur of the radio tuned to the news. Maria sat up slowly, running a hand through her tousled hair. She gazed out the window at the town stirring to life, a mosaic of familiar sights that usually brought her comfort. Today, however, a subtle restlessness stirred within her. Dressing in a simple cotton dress, she made her way downstairs. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee greeted her, along with the sight of Hector standing by the kitchen counter, meticulously arranging a tray with 2 cups and a plate of sliced fruit. "Good morning," he said warmly, turning to face her. His eyes softened as they met hers. "I was just about to bring you breakfast in bed." She smiled appreciatively. "You spoil me." "Only as much as you deserve," he replied, motioning for her to sit at the small breakfast nook by the window. They settled into a comfortable silence, the quiet punctuated by the distant sounds of the town awakening. Maria sipped her coffee thoughtfully, the rich, dark liquid warming her from the inside. Hector watched her carefully, noting the faraway look in her eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked gently. She hesitated before answering. "Just a bit tired. Maybe we could take a day off soon, go somewhere quiet." Hector reached across the table to touch her hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We haven't had a moment to ourselves in a while." She glanced at their entwined fingers, a small crease forming between her brows. "It's been busy," she agreed softly. The morning unfolded with its usual rhythm. Hector attended to the front of the restaurant, coordinating with suppliers and greeting early patrons stopping by for a quick coffee. Maria immersed herself in the kitchen, the familiar motions offering a semblance of solace. She chopped vegetables with practiced precision, the repetitive action allowing her mind to wander. As she prepared the day's special, a hearty pozole with tender chunks of pork and hominy simmered in a rich, red broth, her thoughts drifted to the lingering emptiness she couldn't quite name. The laughter of a child outside caught her attention. Peering through the window, she saw a little girl chasing a butterfly, her giggles filling the air with innocent joy. A pang of longing pierced Maria's heart. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if to soothe the ache. The dream that had visited her repeatedly in recent months resurfaced, a small hand clasped in hers, a child's laughter echoing through their home. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the full weight of the desire she had kept tucked away. "Maria?" A voice interrupted her reverie. She turned to see Elena, one of their waitresses, standing in the doorway. A petite woman with bright eyes and a quick smile, Elena had become like family. "Is everything okay?" Elena asked, concern evident in her expression. Maria forced a reassuring smile. "Yes, of course. Just lost in thought." Elena stepped into the kitchen. "I wanted to check if you needed any help. The lunch crowd is starting to pick up." "Thank you," Maria replied. Could you stir the pozole for a few minutes? I need to step out for a moment. Absolutely, Elena agreed, moving to the stove. Maria slipped out the back door into the small herb garden she tended meticulously. The scent of basil, cilantro, and mint enveloped her. She knelt beside a row of lavender, running her fingers lightly over the fragrant blooms. The act of nurturing these plants had always brought her peace, but today, even this sanctuary felt insufficient. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Hector standing nearby, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I thought I might find you here," he said softly. She offered a faint smile. "Sometimes I just need a breath of fresh air." He nodded, stepping closer. "I spoke with Father Miguel earlier. He mentioned a retreat happening next month, a weekend of reflection at the monastery in the hills. I thought it might be good for us." Maria considered his words. "Perhaps," she replied. "It could be beneficial." He reached out to brush a speck of dirt from her cheek. "I want you to be happy, Maria. Truly happy." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the barrier she had carefully constructed threatened to crumble. "I know you do," she whispered. "And I am grateful." Before either of them could say more, the sound of a car pulling up out front diverted their attention. The delivery of fresh produce had arrived. Hector gave her hand a gentle squeeze before heading back inside. Left alone once more, Maria stood and dusted off her dress. She gazed toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky, their peaks shrouded in a delicate mist. A sense of determination settled over her. She resolved to find a way to fill the void that had taken root in her heart. Re-entering the kitchen, she found Elena humming softly as she worked. The younger woman looked up with a smile. "The pozole smells amazing," Elena remarked. "Thank you for watching over it," Maria replied, taking over the stirring. She tasted the broth, adjusting the seasoning with a pinch of salt and a squeeze of lime. As the lunchtime patrons filled the restaurant, Maria moved seamlessly between tasks. She plated dishes with artistic flair, each one a reflection of her dedication. Yet, beneath the surface, her mind churned with possibilities. Later that afternoon, as the rush subsided, Maria found herself seated at a corner table with Sofia, a longtime friend and confidant. Sofia was a vivacious woman with a quick wit and a compassionate heart. "You seem troubled," Sofia observed, her eyes studying Maria intently. Maria sighed, stirring her tea absently. "It's nothing, really." "After all these years, you should know you can't hide from me," Sofia teased gently. "What's on your mind?" Maria hesitated, weighing the vulnerability of sharing her innermost thoughts. Finally, she spoke. "Do you ever feel like there's something missing in your life, even when everything seems perfect?" Sofia nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes. I think it's natural to have those feelings." "Is it about Hector?" "No," Maria replied quickly. "Hector is wonderful. He's everything I could ask for." "Then what is it?" Maria looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot about starting a family." Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. "Ah, I see. We've tried," Maria continued, emotion thickening her voice. "But it hasn't happened for us." Sophia reached across the table to clasp Maria's hand. "Have you spoken to anyone about it? A doctor, perhaps?" Maria shook her head. "Hector doesn't like to discuss it. He believes that if it's meant to be, it will be." "And what do you believe?" Maria met her friend's gaze. "I believe that sometimes we have to take matters into our own hands." Sophia regarded her carefully. "What are you considering?" "I'm not sure yet," Maria admitted. "But I can't ignore this yearning any longer." Sophia squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you." As evening approached, Maria mulled over their conversation. An idea had begun to take shape, one that both frightened and intrigued her. She knew the implications were significant, but the pull of her desire was strong. That night, after the restaurant had closed and the quiet settled in, Maria and Hector sat together on their balcony. The stars shimmered like scattered diamonds against the velvet sky. "Do you remember when we first opened La Paloma?" Maria asked, breaking the silence. Hector smiled at the memory. "How could I forget? We were so nervous. I thought no one would come. But they did," she continued. "And we've built something beautiful together." We have, he agreed, his gaze affectionate. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about our future, Hector. About expanding our family. He looked away, his expression tightening slightly. Maria. Please, let me finish, she urged gently. I know this is a difficult topic for us. But it's important. He sighed, the weight of unspoken emotions settling between them. I want to give you everything, but some things are beyond our control. Perhaps there are options we haven't considered, she suggested carefully. He shook his head. Our faith guides us. We must accept God's plan. Maria felt a flicker of frustration. But what if this longing is part of that plan? What if we're meant to seek out a solution? Hector stood, pacing to the edge of the balcony. And what solution do you propose? Medicine? Treatments that interfere with nature? She rose to join him. Maybe it's worth exploring. We owe it to ourselves. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. I can't, Maria. I can't question the path laid out for us. She searched his face, her heart aching. Then what do we do? Continue as if this emptiness doesn't exist? He reached out to cup her cheek. We continue to love each other. Isn't that enough? Tears welled in her eyes. I wish it were. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never wanted to cause you pain. She clung to him, the solidity of his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the impasse between them. I know, she murmured. They stood like that for a long while, the sounds of the night enveloping them. Eventually, they parted, each lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared for bed, Maria felt a steely determination settle within her. If Hector could not take the steps she believed necessary, then perhaps it was up to her to find another way. Lying awake in the darkness, she formulated a plan. It was risky, fraught with moral complexities, but the pull of her desire outweighed her reservations. She would need to be careful, to ensure that her actions did not bring harm to their relationship or standing in the community. Across the room, Hector's steady breathing indicated he had finally found sleep. Maria listened to the rhythm, a pang of guilt seeping into her conscience. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the possibilities that lay ahead. The moon cast a pale glow through the window, illuminating the path she was contemplating. Maria knew that the road before her was uncertain, but the hope of fulfilling her deepest longing propelled her forward. In the quiet solitude of the night, she whispered a silent vow to herself. She would do whatever it took to bring new life into their world, a gift not just for herself, but for Hector as well. Even if he couldn't see it now, she believed that he would come to understand. As sleep finally claimed her, Maria dreamt of a child with Hector's eyes and her smile, a symbol of their love made tangible. The image brought her a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The dawn would bring new challenges and opportunities. And soon, the arrival of a stranger would set into motion the events that would alter the course of their lives forever. Chapter 3: Arrival of the Drifter. The sun hung high in the sky, casting an unforgiving heat over San Elroy. Waves of warmth shimmered off the pavement as a solitary figure approached the outskirts of town. Dust clung to his boots and the hem of his jeans, evidence of a long journey on foot. A backpack slung over one shoulder carried all his worldly possessions. Chad Lawson wiped the sweat from his brow, his sandy blonde hair damp and disheveled. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, scanned the horizon with a mix of exhaustion and quiet determination. At 23, Chad had spent the past few years drifting from place to place, searching for something he couldn't quite name. As he entered the town's main street, the aroma of cooking food drew him toward La Paloma. The colorful banners and welcoming facade stood in contrast to the barren landscape he had traversed. His stomach rumbled, reminding him that it had been hours since his last meal. Pushing open the door, Chad was greeted by a burst of cool air and the comforting sounds of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. The interior was a haven of warmth and hospitality. He approached the counter where Hector stood, meticulously arranging a display of freshly baked pastries. "Welcome to La Paloma," Hector greeted, his voice carrying the cordiality of a practiced host. "What can I get for you?" Chad offered a polite smile. "Just a glass of water for now, if that's all right." "Of course," Hector replied, eyeing the young man with a mix of curiosity and concern. He poured a tall glass of water and set it before Chad. "Passing through?" Maybe, Chad answered vaguely, taking a grateful sip. I'm looking for work, actually. Do you know if anyone in town is hiring? Hector considered him for a moment. There was something earnest in Chad's demeanor, a sincerity that resonated. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything, really, Chad replied. I've done a bit of everything, dishwashing, bussing tables, even some cooking. Hector nodded thoughtfully. As it happens, we could use an extra set of hands around here. Are you staying in town long? Chad shrugged. Depends on the work. I'm not in a hurry to be anywhere else. Well, if you're interested, we can give it a trial run, Hector offered. See how it goes. A genuine smile spread across Chad's face. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. At that moment, Maria emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of steaming enchiladas. Her eyes met Chad's briefly, and time seemed to slow. There was a flicker of something unspoken, a connection formed in an instant. Maria, this is Chad, Hector introduced them. He might be helping us out for a while. Maria extended her hand, her expression warm yet measured. Welcome, Chad. We can always use the help. Her touch was soft, and Chad couldn't help but notice the grace with which she moved. Thank you, ma'am, he replied, his gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. Please, call me Maria, she said gently before returning to her duties. Hector gestured toward the back. Why don't I show you around and get you settled? Chad followed Hector through the restaurant, absorbing the details, the vibrant artwork adorning the walls, the rich scents emanating from the kitchen, the sense of community that seemed to permeate the space. They entered a small office where Hector handed him an apron and a notepad. You can start by bussing tables and helping in the kitchen during the rush. We'll sort out the paperwork later. Chad nodded eagerly. I'm ready to get started. As the afternoon progressed, Chad fell into the rhythm of the restaurant. He cleared tables efficiently, assisted the waitstaff, and even helped carry heavy boxes of supplies. His energy seemed boundless, and his willingness to take on any task did not go unnoticed. From the kitchen, Maria observed him discreetly. There was a freshness about Chad, a youthful enthusiasm that contrasted with the familiar faces of San Elroy. She found herself intrigued by his stories shared in passing, snippets of a life filled with movement and adventure. During a lull in the evening, Maria approached Chad as he stacked clean glasses behind the bar. How are you finding your first day? She asked. It's been great, he replied, flashing a quick smile. Everyone's been really welcoming. We're glad to have you, she said sincerely. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. He met her gaze, a hint of playfulness in his eyes. Well, now that you mention it, I wouldn't mind learning a few of your recipes. The food here is incredible. Maria chuckled softly. Flattery will get you everywhere. Is that so? He teased lightly. She arched an eyebrow, a subtle challenge. Perhaps. Before the conversation could continue, Hector called Chad over to assist with the delivery. Maria watched him go, a contemplative expression settling over her features. That night, as the staff gathered to close up, Hector offered Chad a room in their guest house until he could find more permanent accommodations. It's nothing fancy, Hector explained, but it's comfortable. Chad accepted gratefully. You've been more than generous. I appreciate it. It's the least we can do, Maria added. It's important to us that you feel at home. Later, in the quiet of their own quarters, Hector and Maria reflected on the day's events. Chad seems like a good kid, Hector remarked, unbuttoning his shirt. Yes, Maria agreed, her tone thoughtful. He brings a new energy to the place. Hector glanced at her, a subtle smile playing on his lips. I noticed he was eager to learn your recipes. She shrugged lightly. It's nice to have someone take an interest. He wrapped an arm around her waist. Maybe he'll stick around for a while. Perhaps, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Time will tell. In the days that followed, Chad became an integral part of the team at Paloma. His work ethic and friendly demeanor endeared him to the staff and patrons alike. He often shared stories of his travels during breaks, painting vivid pictures of distant cities and open roads. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the town square, Chad found himself alone in the kitchen with Maria. She was preparing a batch of her signature mole sauce, the rich aroma filling the air. "That smells amazing," Chad commented, stepping closer. "Thank you," Maria replied, stirring the pot with practiced ease. "It's my grandmother's recipe." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "Would you teach me how to make it?" She glanced at him, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "It's a long process." "I've got time," he said with a grin. Maria considered him for a moment before nodding. "All right. But you'll have to follow my instructions carefully." "Yes, chef," he replied playfully. As they worked side by side, Maria found herself enjoying the easy rapport between them. Chad asked thoughtful questions, genuinely interested in the nuances of the recipe. Their conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by shared laughter and moments of comfortable silence. At one point, Chad reached across to hand her a spice jar, their fingers brushing briefly. A subtle electricity passed between them, fleeting yet unmistakable. Maria pulled her hand back, her expression composed but her heart beating a touch faster. "You're a quick learner," she remarked, attempting to shift focus. "Only because I have a great teacher," he replied sincerely. She smiled softly. "Flattery again." "Just speaking the truth." The afternoon gave way to evening, and the restaurant buzzed with its usual activity. Yet, an undercurrent of awareness lingered between Maria and Chad, a connection acknowledged silently. That night, as Maria and Hector closed up, Hector commented on the positive impact Chad was having. "Sales have been up this week," he noted, reviewing the ledger. "I think Chad's presence is good for business." Maria nodded absently. "He's certainly enthusiastic." "Maybe we should consider making his position permanent," Hector suggested. She paused, considering the implications. "If he wants to stay, that could be beneficial." Hector glanced at her. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," she replied quickly. "Just tired, I suppose." He reached over to squeeze her hand. "Let's get some rest." Meanwhile, in the guest house, Chad sat on the porch, gazing up at the stars. The quiet of the night was a stark contrast to the bustle of the day. He reflected on how quickly he had become entwined with the life of San Elroy. There was a sense of belonging here that he hadn't felt in a long time. His thoughts drifted to Maria, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the grace with which she moved through the kitchen. There was an undeniable allure that drew him in, despite the boundaries he knew existed. Chad sighed, running a hand through his hair. He reminded himself of the respect he held for Hector, for the generosity the couple had shown him. Yet, the pull toward Maria was growing stronger, a quiet whisper he found increasingly difficult to ignore. Over the next few days, the dynamic between Chad and Maria subtly shifted. Their interactions were infused with a heightened awareness, a shared glance held a moment too long, a casual touch that sparked an inner warmth. One evening, as the restaurant wound down, Maria found Chad cleaning up in the kitchen. "You're still here?" she asked, surprised. He looked up from the sink. "Wanted to make sure everything was set for tomorrow." She smiled appreciatively. "You didn't have to do that." "I don't mind," he replied. "Keeps me busy." Maria hesitated before stepping closer. "I wanted to thank you for all your hard work. You've been a real asset." "That means a lot coming from you," he said earnestly. They stood in a comfortable silence, the air thick with unspoken sentiments. The soft glow of the overhead lights cast a warm hue over the space, creating an intimate atmosphere. "Would you like some tea?" Maria offered. "I usually have a cup before heading home." "I'd like that," Chad agreed. They settled at a small table near the back, steam rising from their mugs. Maria wrapped her hands around her cup, savoring the warmth. "Do you ever miss the places you've been?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I think I've been searching for something I couldn't find on the road." "And have you found it here?" she inquired gently. "Maybe," he replied, his gaze meeting hers. "There's something special about this place." She felt a flutter in her chest. San Elroy has a way of drawing people in. "It's more than just the town," he said softly. Maria's breath caught subtly. She knew the line they were approaching, the precipice of a boundary that shouldn't be crossed. Yet, a part of her was drawn to the edge. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps approached. Hector entered, his expression pleasantly surprised. "Still here?" he asked, looking between them. Just finishing up, Maria replied smoothly. I was about to lock up. Let me help, Hector offered. Chad stood, sensing it was time to depart. I'll head back to the guest house. Good night. Good night, Chad, Maria said, her tone composed. Sleep well, Hector added. As Chad left, Hector turned to Maria. He's a hard worker. Yes, she agreed, gathering the empty cups. Hector watched her carefully. Are you all right? She met his gaze, a reassuring smile on her lips. Of course. Just a long day. They completed their closing routine and made their way home. The evening air was cool, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees lining the street. That night, Maria lay awake, her thoughts a tangled web of emotions. She was drawn to Chad's vitality, the newness he represented. It stirred something within her, a desire she hadn't acknowledged in a long time. Guilt and rationalization warred within her. She told herself that her intentions were innocent, that there was no harm in enjoying his company. Yet, deep down, she knew the path she was treading was fraught with peril. In the quiet darkness, Maria resolved to maintain her composure. She would not jeopardize the life she and Hector had built. But as sleep eluded her, the lingering sense of unrest remained. Across town, Chad stared at the ceiling of his modest room. Thoughts of Maria filled his mind, her laughter, the subtle grace of her movements, the way her eyes seemed to hold untold stories. He knew the complications of his feelings, the impropriety of his attraction. But the heart often defies reason, and he found himself wondering what it would be like to bridge the distance between them. The seeds of a forbidden connection had been sown, and as the days unfolded, the choices they made would set into motion a series of events that could not be undone. In the stillness of the night, the town of San Elroy slept peacefully, unaware of the undercurrents beginning to swirl beneath its tranquil surface. Chapter 4, Sparks Ignite. The morning sun bathed San Elroy in a soft, golden light, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Birds chirped melodiously from the rooftops, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming bougainvillea through the town. At La Paloma, preparations for the day were already underway. Chad arrived early, his steps light as he made his way through the quiet streets. The freshness of the morning invigorated him, and he looked forward to the day's work. Pushing open the restaurant door, he was greeted by the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the comforting sounds of kitchen activity. Good morning, Maria called from behind the counter, her voice carrying a cheerful lilt. Morning, Chad replied with a smile. Anything I can help with? She glanced up, a playful glint in her eyes. Actually, yes. Could you fetch some herbs from the garden? I'm running low on cilantro. Consider it done, he said, heading toward the back. In the small herb garden behind the restaurant, the plants thrived under Maria's attentive care. Chad carefully selected the freshest cilantro, inhaling the fragrant leaves. The tranquility of the garden was a pleasant contrast to the bustling kitchen. As he returned inside, Maria was kneading dough at the large wooden table, her movements rhythmic and precise. Flour dusted her apron and a stray strand of hair fell across her forehead. Here's the cilantro, Chad said, placing it on the counter. Perfect timing, she replied, brushing the hair from her face with the back of her hand. Thank you. He watched her work for a moment, admiring the skill with which she handled the ingredients. You make it look easy, he commented. She chuckled softly. Years of practice. Cooking is as much about intuition as it is about following recipes. I'd love to learn more, he said earnestly. If you're willing to teach me. Maria looked up, meeting his gaze. There was a sincerity in his eyes that she found endearing. I'd be happy to share what I know. Throughout the morning, they worked side by side. Maria demonstrated techniques and shared stories behind each dish. Chad listened attentively, absorbing both the practical knowledge and the cultural nuances she imparted. As lunchtime approached, the restaurant began to fill with patrons. The atmosphere buzzed with lively conversations and the clinking of dishes. Hector moved through the dining area, greeting customers and ensuring everyone was attended to. In the kitchen, Chad and Maria continued their collaboration. At one point, as they both reached for the same spice jar, their hands brushed lightly. A subtle warmth spread through Chad at the contact. Sorry, he said, withdrawing his hand. No need to apologize, Maria replied, her tone light. Yet, she too felt a faint flutter, a momentary shift in the air between them. The afternoon unfolded smoothly. During a brief lull, Maria stepped outside to restock some supplies from the storage shed. Chad noticed and offered to help. "These boxes are heavy," he said, lifting one with ease. "Let me carry them for you." "Thank you," she replied, appreciating the assistance. They walked together back to the kitchen, the conversation flowing effortlessly. "So, what brought you to San Elroy?" Maria inquired. Chad considered the question. "I've been traveling for a while, looking for a place that feels like home. When I arrived here, something just clicked." She smiled softly. "It's a special town. It has a way of embracing people." "I can see that," he agreed. "Everyone's been so welcoming." They reached the kitchen and set down the supplies. As Maria began organizing them, Chad hesitated before speaking again. "Can I ask you something?" he ventured. "Of course," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Do you ever think about leaving? Seeing other places?" Maria paused, considering his question. "Sometimes I wonder what else is out there. But this is my home. It's where I belong." He nodded thoughtfully. "I admire that. Knowing where you belong." She looked at him, her expression gentle. "You'll find your place too." Their eyes held for a moment longer than usual before the sound of Hector calling for assistance interrupted. "Chad, could you help me with a delivery out front?" Hector's voice carried into the kitchen. "Be right there," Chad replied, giving Maria a quick nod before departing. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. As evening settled in, the restaurant transitioned into a cozy haven, candles flickering on each table and soft music playing in the background. After the dinner rush, Chad stepped outside to the back patio, seeking a moment of respite. The night air was cool, and the sky was awash with stars. He leaned against the railing, lost in thought. "Enjoying the view?" Maria's voice came from behind. He turned to see her approaching, a light shawl draped over her shoulders. "It's beautiful out here," he said. She joined him at the railing. "I often come here to clear my mind after a long day." They stood side by side, the quiet enveloping them. The sounds of the town had faded, leaving only the whisper of the breeze and the distant hoot of an owl. "Thank you for today," Chad said softly. "I learned a lot." Maria smiled. "You're a quick study. It's nice to have someone so eager to learn." He glanced at her, the moonlight casting a soft glow on her features. "I appreciate you taking the time." She looked up at the stars. "Sometimes it's easy to forget how vast the world is. We get so caught up in our routines." "Do you ever wish things were different?" he asked gently. She considered his question. "I think everyone has moments of wonder about the paths not taken." Chad felt a connection in her words, a shared understanding. "I suppose that's why I've been wandering, to see what paths are out there." Maria turned to face him. "And have you found what you're looking for?" "Maybe," he replied, his gaze steady. "Or maybe I'm just beginning to." A subtle tension hung in the air, a crossroads of choices unspoken. Maria broke the gaze, her eyes returning to the sky. "It's getting late," she said softly. "We should probably head back." "You're right," Chad agreed, though a part of him wished to linger. They re-entered the restaurant, the warmth inside contrasting with the cool night. Hector was finishing up at the bar, organizing glasses for the next day. "Ah, there you two are," he said with a smile. "I was about to lock up." "Just enjoying the evening," Maria explained. "Well, don't let me keep you," Hector replied. "Chad, thanks again for all your help today." "Happy to be of service," Chad said. As they all prepared to leave, Hector locked the front door, and they stepped out onto the quiet street. "Good night, Chad," Maria said, her tone cordial. "Good night," he responded, giving a small wave before heading toward the guest house. Hector and Maria walked together toward their home. The silence between them was comfortable, the familiarity of years spent side by side. "He seems to be fitting in well," Hector commented. "Yes, he's been very helpful," Maria agreed. "Perhaps we should invite him to join us for dinner one night," Hector suggested. "Get to know him better." That's a nice idea, she replied. They reached their home and settled into their evening routine. Hector soon fell asleep, his steady breathing filling the room. Maria, however, found herself restless. She sat by the window, gazing out at the town bathed in moonlight. Thoughts of the day's interactions with Chad surfaced unbidden. There was an undeniable spark, a sense of being seen in a way that stirred something deep within her. Maria chastised herself gently. She valued her marriage and the life she and Hector had built. Yet, she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of emotions that Chad's presence had awakened. Determined to refocus her thoughts, she returned to bed and closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. The next day brought new tasks and distractions. A local festival was approaching, and La Paloma was catering a significant portion of the event. Preparations required all hands on deck. Chad threw himself into the work, assisting with menu planning, organizing supplies, and coordinating with vendors. His enthusiasm was infectious, and the staff appreciated his contributions. One afternoon, as they were loading supplies into a truck, Chad and Maria found themselves working closely once again. "Careful with that crate," Maria cautioned. "It's fragile." "Got it," Chad replied, lifting it with care. As they secured the items, a sudden gust of wind caught Maria's hat, sending it tumbling across the yard. "I'll get it," Chad offered, chasing after the wayward accessory. He retrieved the hat and returned it to her with a grin. "Seems the wind has a mind of its own today." She laughed lightly. "Thank you. This hat has a habit of escaping." He placed it gently back on her head, their proximity bringing them close. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Maria became acutely aware of his nearness, the intensity of his gaze. She stepped back, a touch flustered. "We should finish up." "Right," Chad agreed, sensing her discomfort. The remainder of the day passed without incident, but the encounter lingered in both their minds. That evening, the town gathered in the square for a pre-festival celebration. Lights were strung between lampposts, music filled the air, and the aroma of street food wafted through the crowd. Hector and Maria attended together, mingling with friends and neighbors. Chad arrived later, blending into the festivities. At one point, Maria stood at the edge of the crowd, watching a group of children dancing. Chad approached, holding 2 cups of punch. "Care for a drink?" he offered. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup. They sipped in companionable silence, the energy of the festival surrounding them. "It's a lovely evening," Chad remarked. "Yes, it is," Maria agreed. "The town really comes alive during festivals." "I can see why you love it here," he said. She glanced at him. "It's home." He hesitated before speaking again. "Maria, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I want you to know that I value our friendship." She met his gaze, sensing the deeper meaning behind his words. "I value it as well." "Good," he said softly. "I wouldn't want anything to jeopardize that." Before the conversation could progress, Hector joined them. "There you are," he said cheerfully. "I was wondering where you'd gone off to." "Just enjoying the festivities," Maria replied smoothly. "Chad, glad you could make it," Hector added. "Have you tried the tamales? They're excellent this year." "Not yet, but I'll be sure to," Chad said. The 3 of them spent the rest of the evening circulating among the crowd. Yet, beneath the surface, the subtle tension between Maria and Chad remained. As the night drew to a close, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads. The path she chose next would have lasting implications, not just for herself, but for those around her. She resolved to tread carefully, to honor the commitments she had made. But the spark that had ignited could not be entirely extinguished, and she wondered how long she could balance on the edge without tipping over. In the quiet of the night, as the town settled into slumber, the stars above bore silent witness to the intertwining fates of those beneath them. Chapter 5: Crossing the Line. The heat of the day had given way to a balmy evening, the sky awash with hues of deep indigo and soft lavender. Stars began to peek through the fading light, their distant glimmers mirrored by the lanterns that illuminated the streets of San Elroy. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine and the distant strum of a guitar, the melody weaving through the quiet town. At La Paloma, the last of the diners had departed, their laughter and conversations lingering like echoes in the empty space. Hector had left earlier to attend a late meeting at the church, leaving Maria and Chad to close up. The restaurant felt different in these moments, more intimate, shadows stretching across the polished wooden floors, the flicker of candlelight casting warm glows on the walls adorned with vibrant artwork. Maria stood behind the bar, meticulously arranging bottles and wiping down surfaces. She moved with practiced grace, each motion deliberate and measured. Chad watched her from across the room as he stacked chairs onto tables, his gaze drawn to the way her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, the subtle curve of her neck as she tilted her head in concentration. "Do you need any help with that?" he offered, breaking the comfortable silence. She looked up, a soft smile touching her lips. "I think I've got it, but thank you." He approached the bar, resting his hands on the edge. "It's been a long day." She nodded, her eyes meeting his. "It has. But productive." Chad hesitated before speaking again. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a place here. It means more than you know." Maria regarded him thoughtfully. "You've brought a lot of positive energy to La Paloma. We're fortunate to have you." A moment of silence stretched between them, the air thickening with unspoken words. The distant sounds of the town seemed to fade, leaving only the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. "Sometimes I feel like I've finally found somewhere I belong," Chad confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria's gaze softened. "I'm glad you feel that way." He took a deep breath, the vulnerability in his expression palpable. "Maria, there's something I've been wanting to tell you." She felt her heartbeat quicken, a mix of anticipation and apprehension swirling within her. "Chad." Before she could continue, he stepped closer. "I know this might be inappropriate, but I can't keep it to myself any longer. I feel a connection with you, something I haven't felt before." Her mind raced, a flurry of emotions vying for dominance. She was acutely aware of the diminishing space between them, the warmth radiating from his presence. "Chad, we can't," she began, her voice wavering. "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I can't ignore how I feel." Maria closed her eyes briefly, attempting to steady herself. "This isn't right. I'm married." He nodded, his eyes reflecting both understanding and longing. "I respect you, and I respect Hector. But I can't deny the pull I feel toward you." She turned away, her hands gripping the edge of the bar. "You don't understand the consequences." Chad reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against her arm. "Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll never bring it up again." The contact sent a jolt through her, a spark igniting something she had kept suppressed. She opened her eyes, tears threatening to surface. "It's not that simple." "Maybe it is," he whispered. Maria faced him, the conflict evident in her gaze. "Chad, you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't complicate it with something that can't be." He searched her eyes, his expression earnest. "Age doesn't change what I feel." She hesitated, the barriers she had constructed beginning to crumble. "This could hurt a lot of people." He stepped closer, his voice soft but resolute. "I don't want to cause any pain. But I can't pretend anymore." Maria felt the last of her resistance wane, a magnetic force drawing her toward him. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings, but her heart beat louder, drowning out all else. Without another word, Chad gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tentative, giving her the opportunity to pull away. She remained still, her breath hitching as she felt the warmth of his palms against her skin. Slowly, he leaned in, their lips meeting in a tender, hesitant kiss. The world seemed to fall away, the weight of her responsibilities, the expectations, the rules, all dissolved in that singular moment. The softness of his lips, the faint taste of spearmint, the surge of emotion, it all enveloped her, pulling her deeper into a realm she had long denied herself. As the kiss deepened, Maria's arms found their way around his neck, her fingers entwining in his hair. A fire ignited within her, passion and desire intertwining with years of suppressed longing. Chad's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, his heartbeat echoing her own. Time lost meaning as they surrendered to the intensity of their connection. The scent of spices and citrus lingered in the air, mingling with the intoxicating haze that surrounded them. The gentle clink of a glass settling on the bar broke the spell, grounding them back to reality. Maria pulled away abruptly, her eyes wide with realization. "What have we done?" she whispered, her voice tinged with panic. Chad reached for her, concern etching his features. Maria. She stepped back, shaking her head. This is wrong. I shouldn't have. We can't. He held her gaze, his expression filled with both regret and yearning. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push you. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together the fragments of her composure. We have to forget this happened. Can you? He asked softly. Maria looked away, unable to answer. The tumult of emotions within her made it impossible to think clearly. Guilt gnawed at her, but beneath it lay a current of exhilaration she couldn't deny. I need time, she managed to say. Chad nodded slowly. I understand. Take all the time you need. She took a shaky breath. We should finish closing up. They moved through the remaining tasks in silence, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken feelings. When everything was done, Maria gathered her belongings, avoiding his gaze. Good night, she said quietly, turning toward the door. Good night, Maria, he replied, his voice laced with a mix of hope and resignation. As she stepped out into the night, the cool air hit her like a wave, contrasting sharply with the heat that still lingered on her skin. She walked home quickly, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. How would she face Hector? What did this mean for her marriage, for her carefully constructed life? Entering her home, she found the house dark, save for a lamp left on in the living room. Relief and guilt washed over her simultaneously. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. The memory of Chad's kiss lingered, vivid and consuming. Part of her longed to relive it, while another part recoiled at the betrayal it represented. Sleep eluded her that night. When dawn broke, she rose from the restless vigil, determined to face the day with a semblance of normalcy. At the restaurant, the usual bustle of morning preparations provided a welcome distraction. She immersed herself in her work, focusing on the details, the precise measurements, the timing of each dish. Yet, beneath the surface, her emotions churned. Chad arrived, his demeanor cautious yet hopeful. Good morning, he greeted softly. Good morning, she replied, her tone polite but distant. An awkward silence settled between them. Chad cleared his throat. About last night. Please, Maria interjected, her eyes fixed on the chopping board. We should keep things professional. He nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. Of course. The day progressed with a strained tension. Hector noticed the change, his brow furrowing with concern. Is everything all right? He asked Maria during a quiet moment. She forced a smile. Just tired. Didn't sleep well. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Make sure to take care of yourself. We can manage if you need to rest. Thank you, but I'll be fine, she assured him. Later, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, Maria found herself alone in the storage room. The quiet enveloped her, providing a brief respite from the turmoil. Chad appeared at the doorway, hesitant. Maria, may I speak with you? She looked up, her expression guarded. What is it? He stepped inside, keeping a respectful distance. I wanted to apologize. I never intended to cause you distress. She sighed, the weight of her conflicting emotions pressing upon her. I know. But what's done is done. He met her gaze earnestly. I can't pretend it didn't happen. And I don't think you can either. She hesitated, the truth of his words resonating. Chad, this is complicated. It doesn't have to be, he said gently. But I understand if you want to end it here. Maria struggled with her response. Part of her wanted to sever the connection, to return to the safety of her familiar life. Yet another part of her yearned to explore the depths of this newfound passion. We can't let anyone know, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. A glimmer of hope lit in his eyes. I won't tell a soul. She took a deep breath, making a silent decision. Then we keep this between us. No one else can find out. He nodded solemnly. You have my word. Things need to remain as normal as possible, she added. We can't risk raising suspicion. Agreed, he affirmed. I'll follow your lead. A fragile understanding formed between them, bound by secrecy and shared desire. As they returned to their respective tasks, a new layer of complexity settled over their interactions. Over the following days, they navigated their clandestine relationship with cautious steps. In public, they maintained professionalism, their exchanges courteous yet unremarkable. But in stolen moments, a lingering glance, a brief touch, they communicated the depths of their connection. Maria grappled with her conscience, the guilt ever present. Yet, when alone with Chad, the world seemed to fade, leaving only the intensity of their shared experiences. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and Hector had retired early due to a headache, Maria and Chad remained to finalize inventory. The quiet of the empty establishment enveloped them, the soft glow of the overhead lights casting a warm ambience. As they worked side by side, their hands brushed, sending a familiar thrill through Maria. She looked up to find Chad watching her, his eyes reflecting the same mix of longing and trepidation she felt. Without words, they moved toward each other, the pull between them irresistible. Their lips met in a fervent kiss, the pent-up emotions finding release. The world outside ceased to exist as they lost themselves in each other. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Maria whispered, "We have to be careful." Chad nodded, his fingers lightly tracing the curve of her cheek. "I know." She stepped back, smoothing her dress in an attempt to regain composure. "We should go." "All right," he agreed softly. They exited the restaurant separately, each slipping into the night with a mix of exhilaration and apprehension. As Maria walked home, the gravity of her choices weighed heavily upon her. She knew the path she was on was fraught with risks, but the allure of the forbidden had taken hold. In the days that followed, their secret continued, each encounter intensifying the bond between them. They navigated their dual lives with careful precision, aware of the delicate balance they maintained. Yet, beneath the surface, Maria wrestled with her conscience. The deception gnawed at her, even as she reveled in the newfound passion. She questioned how long they could continue without consequences, the shadow of potential discovery looming ever larger. Chad, for his part, was consumed by his feelings for her. Each moment they shared solidified his resolve, even as he acknowledged the complexities of their situation. The secrets they harbored wove an intricate web around them, binding them together even as it threatened to unravel the lives they knew. And all the while, Hector remained unaware, his trust in Maria unwavering. The foundation of their marriage rested on a precipice, the impact of their actions yet to be fully realized. In the quiet town of San Elroy, the undercurrents of hidden desires and concealed truths continued to ripple beneath the surface, setting the stage for the inevitable reckoning that lay ahead. Chapter 6: The Dance of Deception. The days in San Elroy unfolded with a familiar rhythm, the sun rising over the rolling hills, casting its golden light upon the adobe buildings and cobblestone streets. Yet, beneath the town's tranquil surface, a quiet storm brewed in the hearts of Maria and Chad. Their clandestine affair had woven itself into the fabric of their daily lives, each stolen moment adding threads of passion and complexity to the tapestry of their connection. In the early mornings, before the rest of the staff arrived at La Paloma, Maria and Chad found solace in the quiet kitchen. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with the scent of rising dough as they worked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally over shared utensils. These fleeting touches sent subtle sparks between them, igniting a warmth that lingered long after. One such morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, Maria stood at the counter kneading bread. Chad approached silently, his presence felt before seen. He reached around her to grab a jar of honey, his arm grazing hers. The simple contact quickened her pulse. "You're up early," she remarked softly, not turning to face him. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, his voice low. "Thought I'd get a head start on the prep." They stood close, the space between them charged with unspoken desire. Maria's hands stilled on the dough as she felt Chad's gaze upon her. She glanced over her shoulder, their eyes meeting. The world outside faded, leaving only the two of them in that intimate moment. "Someone might see us," she whispered, a hint of caution in her tone. He offered a faint smile. "Everyone else is still asleep." She knew the risks, but the allure of these moments was irresistible. Chad reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingertips lingering against her skin. Maria closed her eyes briefly, savoring the tenderness of his touch. "Last night was..." he began, searching for the right words. "Don't," she interrupted gently. "If we talk about it, it becomes too real." He nodded, understanding the delicate balance they maintained. Then let's just enjoy the silence. They resumed their tasks, the air thick with shared secrets. The sounds of the waking town gradually seeped into the kitchen, the distant bell of the church clock, the murmurs of vendors setting up stalls in the square. With a silent agreement, they retreated to their respective roles as others began to arrive. Throughout the day, Maria and Chad exchanged subtle glances across the bustling restaurant. A brief meeting of eyes, a slight smile, small gestures that spoke volumes. To the casual observer, their interactions appeared professional, but beneath the surface, a current of intimacy flowed. Hector moved through La Paloma with his usual affable demeanor, attending to customers and overseeing operations. He seemed content, his trust in Maria and the staff unwavering. Yet, there were moments when his gaze lingered on his wife, a shadow of concern crossing his features. One afternoon, as Maria was arranging fresh flowers on the tables, Hector approached her. "You seem different lately," he remarked, his tone light but probing. She glanced up, meeting his eyes with a practiced smile. "Different how?" He shrugged slightly. "I don't know. Preoccupied, perhaps. Is everything all right?" "Just busy with the restaurant," she replied smoothly. "The upcoming festival has me thinking about new menu ideas." He accepted her explanation with a nod, but a hint of uncertainty remained. "If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm here." "Of course," she assured him, placing a hand on his arm. "Thank you." As he walked away, Maria felt a pang of guilt twist within her. Deception did not come naturally to her, and each lie by omission weighed heavily. Yet, the thought of ending her affair with Chad filled her with an ache she wasn't ready to confront. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate among the townspeople. In a place as close-knit as San Elroy, subtle changes rarely went unnoticed. At the weekly market, Señora Alvarez leaned toward her friend Sofia, her voice hushed. "Have you noticed anything unusual about Maria lately?" she asked, her eyes darting around to ensure they weren't overheard. Sofia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "She's been spending a lot of time with that new boy, Chad," Señora Alvarez continued. "They seem awfully close." Sofia considered this. "He's helping at the restaurant. It makes sense they'd work together." "Perhaps," the older woman conceded. "But there's something in the way they look at each other." Sofia dismissed the notion with a wave of her hand. "Maria is devoted to Hector. You know that." "True," Señora Alvarez admitted, though a glint of skepticism remained. "But sometimes, even the strongest foundations can crack." The seed of gossip was planted, and as the days passed, it found fertile ground. Small observations were magnified, a shared laugh between Maria and Chad, their simultaneous arrivals and departures, the moments when they seemed lost in private thoughts. Back at La Paloma, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Maria sensed the shifting attitudes, the subtle glances from staff and patrons alike. One evening, as she and Chad prepared to close, she voiced her concerns. "People are starting to talk," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the ledger before her. Chad leaned against the counter, his expression earnest. "What are they saying?" "That we're close," she replied, choosing her words carefully. He sighed softly. "We knew this might happen." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Maybe we should be more cautious. Create some distance." A flicker of hurt crossed his face. "Is that what you want?" "It's not about what I want," she responded, her voice tinged with frustration. "It's about protecting what matters." He stepped closer, his tone gentle. "Maria, I don't want to cause you any more stress." She closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the situation pressing upon her. "I need time to think." Chad nodded, respecting her need for space. "All right. Whatever you decide, I'll support it." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Hector entered, carrying a box of supplies. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, his gaze flickering between them. "Not at all," Maria replied quickly. "We were just finishing up." Hector set the box down, a subtle tension in his posture. "I thought I'd help with the restocking." "Thank you," she said, forcing a smile. As they worked, an uncomfortable silence settled over the trio. Hector's usual affability seemed dampened, his responses curt. Maria sensed an undercurrent of suspicion, though he gave no direct indication. Later that night, as Maria and Hector prepared for bed, the unspoken tensions lingered. "Is everything okay?" she ventured, watching him as he undressed. He paused, his back to her. "Why do you ask?" "You seem distant," she observed. He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "Just tired. It's been a long day." She approached him, placing a hand on his arm. "If something's bothering you, we can talk about it." He studied her for a moment before offering a faint smile. "I'm fine, really." She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. As they settled into bed, the space between them felt wider than ever. Across town, Chad lay awake in his modest room, his thoughts consumed by Maria. The thrill of their affair was tempered by the reality of their circumstances. He cared deeply for her, but he couldn't ignore the consequences that loomed. The following days saw a noticeable shift in their interactions. Maria and Chad maintained a professional distance, their personal exchanges limited. The strain was evident, and those around them took note. Elena, one of the waitresses, approached Maria during a quiet moment. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently. Maria glanced up, her expression guarded. "Why do you ask?" "You just seem a bit off lately," Elena explained. "If there's anything I can help with, please let me know." "Thank you, Elena," Maria replied, offering a small smile. "I'm just preoccupied with the festival preparations." Elena accepted the explanation, though concern lingered in her eyes. Meanwhile, Hector observed the changes with growing unease. One evening, he confided in Father Miguel after Mass. "I feel like something's different with Maria," Hector admitted, his voice low. The priest regarded him thoughtfully. "Have you spoken to her about your concerns?" "She's assured me everything is fine," Hector replied. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's more she's not telling me." Father Miguel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Marriage is a journey of many seasons. Perhaps she's going through a personal struggle. Offer her your support and patience." Hector nodded, though the advice provided limited comfort. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and they took root in the fertile soil of his imagination. One afternoon, as Maria was organizing the storage room, Hector joined her. "Need any help?" he offered. She looked up, surprised by his presence. "Sure, you can hand me those jars." They worked in silence for a few moments before Hector broke the quiet. "Do you ever feel like we don't talk as much as we used to?" he asked, his tone casual but edged with concern. She paused, considering his question. "I suppose we've both been busy. Maybe we should make more time for each other," he suggested. "Go on a trip, just the two of us." Maria felt a pang of guilt. "That sounds nice." He smiled softly. "It's been a while since we took a break. We could visit the coast." She forced enthusiasm into her response. "I'd like that." As they continued organizing, Maria's mind raced. The idea of spending time alone with Hector filled her with both relief and anxiety. Perhaps it was the opportunity they needed to reconnect, to mend the widening rift. That evening, Maria sought out Chad after closing. "I think we should end this," she said firmly, though her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. He looked at her, a mixture of sadness and understanding in his gaze. "If that's what you want." "It's what's best," she replied, her voice faltering slightly. He nodded slowly. "I'll respect your decision." She reached out to touch his hand, a final gesture of farewell. "Thank you for understanding." As she walked away, tears welled in her eyes. The loss she felt was profound, yet she hoped it was a step toward healing the fractures in her life. The next few days were a test of resolve. Maria threw herself into preparations for the festival, her focus unwavering. She and Hector began making plans for their trip, and a semblance of normalcy returned to their household. However, the undercurrents of gossip persisted. At the local market, conversations turned to speculation about the sudden shift in Maria and Chad's dynamic. "I heard they're not speaking as much," one vendor remarked to another. "Maybe she finally realized the inappropriateness of their closeness," the other responded. Such whispers reached Maria's ears, further fueling her determination to distance herself from Chad. Despite their efforts, the consequences of their affair rippled through their lives. Chad contemplated leaving San Elroy, believing his presence only complicated matters. Yet, a part of him clung to the hope that circumstances might change. One evening, as the festival drew near, Maria and Hector attended a community gathering. The atmosphere was lively, filled with music and laughter. Maria felt the weight lifting, the joy of the moment allowing her a reprieve from her worries. As they mingled with friends, Hector introduced her to an old acquaintance. "Maria, this is Carlos," Hector said. "We grew up together." "Pleasure to meet you," Maria greeted warmly. Carlos smiled. "I've heard wonderful things about you and La Paloma. I look forward to visiting." Throughout the evening, Maria noticed Hector's spirits were high. She hoped this was a sign of better days ahead. However, as the night progressed, she caught sight of Chad across the crowd. Their eyes met briefly, a shared look of longing and resignation passing between them. She quickly averted her gaze, focusing on the conversation at hand. Hector noticed her distraction. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Just enjoying the festivities." But the encounter had unsettled her. The boundaries she had tried to establish seemed fragile in the face of her lingering feelings. Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Hector took her hand. "I'm glad we came tonight," he said. "It feels like things are getting back to normal." She squeezed his hand gently. "Me too." Yet, as they approached their home, Maria couldn't shake the sense that the consequences of her actions were far from over. The dance of deception had taken its toll, and the path ahead remained uncertain. In the quiet of the night, she stood by the window, gazing out at the distant lights of the town. The choices she had made weighed heavily upon her, and she wondered if redemption was possible. The whispers of the town, the subtle shifts in Hector's demeanor, and the unresolved emotions with Chad all converged, leaving Maria at a crossroads. She knew that the truth had a way of surfacing, and the delicate balance she had tried to maintain was precarious at best. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky with shades of rose and gold, Maria made a silent vow to face whatever came next with honesty and courage. But in the depths of her heart, she understood that some secrets could never be fully undone, and the shadows cast by her choices would follow her, entwining with the fate of those she held dear. Chapter 7: Threads Unraveling. The sky over San Elroy was a canvas of muted grays and soft blues, the sun hidden behind a veil of clouds that promised a rare hint of rain. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension that seemed to mirror the undercurrents stirring in the lives of Maria, Chad, and Hector. Chad stood on the porch of the guest house, gazing out at the distant horizon where the desert met the sky. The usual warmth he found in the morning sun was absent, replaced by a cool breeze that tousled his hair. He took a deep breath, his mind awash with thoughts of Maria. The time they had spent apart recently had only intensified his feelings for her. He replayed their moments together, the stolen glances, the secret touches, the shared whispers in the quiet corners of La Paloma. He knew the risks, the moral boundaries they had crossed, but his heart clung to the possibility of a future with her. Chad began to envision a life where they could be together openly, free from the shadows of secrecy. The idea of Maria leaving Hector was fraught with complications, yet the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the only path toward true happiness. Determined, Chad resolved to speak with Maria about his feelings. He wanted to know if she shared his vision of a future together or if their affair was destined to remain a hidden fragment of their lives. Meanwhile, Maria moved through the bustling market, selecting fresh produce for the restaurant. Her interactions with the vendors were cordial, her smile gracious, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Beneath her composed exterior, Maria was meticulously calculating her next steps. She had sensed Chad's growing attachment and knew that his feelings could jeopardize the delicate balance she had established. While she cared for him, her primary objective was clear, a goal she had set in motion long before his arrival. Maria's desire for a child had driven her to orchestrate their affair, a means to an end that she believed would ultimately strengthen her marriage to Hector. As she inspected a bundle of ripe tomatoes, Maria considered the unfolding of her plan. She needed to manage Chad's expectations, to ensure that his aspirations did not interfere with her intentions. Maria was adept at navigating the complexities of human emotion, and she was prepared to employ whatever means necessary to maintain control. Returning to La Paloma, Maria found Chad waiting for her in the courtyard. His expression was earnest, his eyes reflecting a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Maria, can we talk?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. She regarded him calmly. "Of course. Is everything all right?" He glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we have." Maria sensed where the conversation was headed and braced herself. "Chad, we've discussed this. Our situation is complicated." "I understand that," he replied, stepping closer. "But I can't ignore how I feel. I want more than stolen moments and secrecy." She met his gaze, her expression measured. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "Leave with me," he said, the words tumbling out with a fervent sincerity. "We can start fresh somewhere else. Build a life together." Maria paused, allowing a flicker of emotion to cross her features. "Chad, you know I can't do that." "Why not?" he pressed. "Are you truly happy here? With Hector?" She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Hector is my husband. We've built a life together over many years." "But does he make you happy?" Chad asked, his eyes searching hers. Maria looked away, her gaze settling on the blooming jasmine that climbed the courtyard wall. "Happiness is a complex thing." He reached out to gently touch her arm. "You don't have to settle for a life that doesn't fulfill you." She pulled back subtly, creating a small distance between them. "Chad, you're young. You have so much ahead of you. I can't be the one to hold you back." "You're not holding me back," he insisted. "You're the reason I want to move forward." Maria sighed softly. "This isn't just about us. There are other people involved, other lives affected." He shook his head, determination hardening his features. "Sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the sake of our own happiness." She met his gaze once more, allowing a hint of vulnerability to show. "And what if the happiness you seek is an illusion?" Chad frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Passion can cloud our judgment," she explained. "What we feel in the moment doesn't always translate into lasting fulfillment." He took her hands in his grip firm yet gentle. "I know what my heart tells me. And I believe you feel it too." Maria allowed a moment of silence to linger before gently withdrawing her hands. "I need time to think," she said softly. "Please, understand that." He nodded reluctantly. "All right. But promise me you'll consider it." "I will," she assured him, offering a faint smile. "Now, we should prepare for tonight. Hector has arranged to dinner, and we need to be ready." Chad's expression shifted to one of resignation. "Of course. I'll see you inside." As he walked away, Maria watched him with a mixture of empathy and resolve. She knew that his feelings were genuine, but she couldn't allow them to derail her plans. Turning toward the restaurant, she steeled herself for the evening ahead. Later that day, La Paloma was aglow with soft lighting, the tables elegantly set for an intimate dinner. Hector had invited a select group of friends and associates to celebrate the restaurant's recent success and to discuss potential opportunities for expansion. Maria moved through the dining area, ensuring every detail was perfect. The aroma of her carefully prepared dishes filled the air, a testament to her culinary expertise. Chad assisted with the arrangements, his demeanor professional yet subdued. As guests began to arrive, the atmosphere buzzed with cordial conversations and clinking glasses. Hector greeted each person warmly, his charisma on full display. He was in high spirits, proud of the accomplishments he and Maria had achieved together. During the meal, Maria found herself seated between Hector and Chad, an arrangement that heightened the underlying tensions. Across the table, their guests engaged in animated discussions about business ventures and community events. Hector turned to Maria, his eyes reflecting genuine affection. "You've outdone yourself tonight," he praised. "The food is exceptional." She smiled graciously. "Thank you. I'm glad everyone is enjoying it." Chad remained quiet, his focus on his plate. Hector noticed his silence and addressed him. "Chad, you've been a tremendous asset to us. Have you considered staying on permanently?" Maria glanced at Chad, gauging his reaction. He looked up, a hint of surprise in his expression. "I appreciate that, Hector. I've enjoyed my time here." "Good," Hector responded enthusiastically. "We have big plans for La Paloma, and we'd be happy to have you as part of the team." Chad forced a smile. That's very generous of you. Maria intervened subtly. Chad has been a great help, indeed. We're fortunate to have such dedicated staff. The conversation shifted as one of the guests raised a toast to the continued success of the restaurant. Glasses were raised, and a chorus of well wishes echoed around the table. As the evening progressed, the unspoken tensions grew more pronounced. Chad's gaze frequently drifted toward Maria, his emotions barely concealed. Hector seemed oblivious, engrossed in discussions about future endeavors. At one point, Maria excused herself to the kitchen. Chad seized the opportunity to follow shortly after. Finding her alone near the storeroom, he approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her expression neutral. "Just needed a moment." He hesitated before speaking. "I meant what I said earlier." Maria glanced toward the doorway, ensuring they were not overheard. "This isn't the time or place." "Then when?" he implored. "I feel like you're slipping away." She sighed softly. "Chad, please. We can't do this here." Before he could respond, Hector appeared in the doorway. "There you two are," he said jovially. "We're about to serve dessert." Maria composed herself quickly. "Yes, of course. I'll bring it out." Hector smiled, seemingly unaware of the tension. "Excellent. Chad, join us back at the table?" Chad nodded, casting a lingering look at Maria before following Hector out. Left alone, Maria leaned against the counter, her mind racing. The walls seemed to be closing in, the carefully constructed facade of her life showing signs of fracture. After the guests had departed, and the restaurant was quiet once more, Hector and Maria began tidying up. The clatter of dishes and the hum of the dishwasher filled the silence between them. "You were wonderful tonight," Hector remarked, stacking plates. "Thank you," she replied softly. He paused, observing her with a gentle curiosity. "You seem distant. Is something bothering you?" Maria forced a reassuring smile. "Just tired. It's been a long day." He stepped closer, concern evident in his eyes. "You've been working so hard. Maybe we should take that trip we talked about." She nodded absently. "Perhaps." Hector reached out to touch her arm. "I worry about you." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "There's no need. I'm fine." He searched her eyes for a moment before relenting. "If you say so." That night, as they prepared for bed, Maria felt the weight of her decisions pressing upon her. Lying beside Hector, she stared at the ceiling, her mind a tumult of conflicting emotions. In the quiet darkness, she contemplated the path she had chosen. Her manipulation of Chad had been a calculated risk, one she believed necessary to achieve her deepest desire. Yet, the unintended consequences, the depth of his feelings, the potential fallout, threatened to unravel everything. She turned to look at Hector, his features softened in sleep. There was a time when their love had been uncomplicated, their dreams aligned. But the years had introduced challenges neither of them had anticipated. Maria rose silently from the bed, slipping out onto the balcony. The cool night air provided a stark contrast to the warmth inside. She gazed out over the sleeping town, the distant lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. A sense of isolation enveloped her. The choices she had made, the secrets she harbored, they created a barrier between her and the world she inhabited. Yet, she remained resolute. Her goal was within reach, and she was willing to bear the burdens that came with it. The following morning, Maria sought out Chad before the restaurant opened. Finding him in the garden, she approached with a determined stride. "We need to talk," she stated plainly. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I've been wanting to see you." She took a steadying breath. "I've made a decision." He waited expectantly. "I can't leave Hector," she said firmly. "Our lives are too entwined. I belong here." Chad's expression fell. "Maria, please reconsider. We could be happy together." She shook her head. "It wouldn't work. The reality is far more complicated than the fantasy." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "So that's it? You used me?" Her gaze hardened slightly. "You knew from the beginning that this was temporary." "I thought you felt something real," he countered. She softened her tone. "I do care for you. But not in the way you want. He stared at her, a mix of hurt and disbelief. "I can't stay here under these circumstances." "I understand," she replied quietly. "Perhaps it's best if you move on." Chad nodded slowly, resignation settling in. "I guess this is goodbye, then." "Take care of yourself," Maria offered, her eyes reflecting a hint of genuine concern. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone among the blooming flowers. As the day progressed, Maria informed Hector that Chad had decided to leave. "That's unfortunate," Hector remarked. "He was a good worker." "Yes," Maria agreed. "But he felt it was time to move on." Hector accepted the explanation without suspicion. "We'll find someone else. In the meantime, we'll manage." That evening, Maria and Hector shared a quiet dinner at home. The atmosphere was calm, a semblance of normalcy returning. Yet, Maria couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. The threads of her carefully woven plans were beginning to fray. While she had managed to navigate the immediate crisis, the repercussions of her actions loomed. In the days that followed, Chad's departure became the talk of the town. Speculation abounded, but no one knew the true reasons. Maria maintained her composed exterior, focusing on the restaurant and her life with Hector. However, beneath the surface, a new development began to unfold, one that would have profound implications. Maria suspected that her goal had been achieved, a possibility that filled her with both anticipation and trepidation. As she stood on the threshold of a new chapter, Maria faced the uncertain future with a mixture of determination and reflection. The choices she had made, the lives she had impacted, they all converged toward an inevitable conclusion. Their intertwined fates continued to unravel, each thread revealing the intricate patterns of love, desire, and consequence that defined their lives in the quiet town of San Elroy. Chapter 8: Love and Lies. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over San Elroy, painting the adobe buildings with a rich hue. The town bustled with activity as vendors closed up their stalls and families prepared for the evening ahead. In the courtyard of La Paloma, the scent of blooming roses mingled with the aroma of spices drifting from the kitchen. Maria stood by the fountain, her fingers trailing through the cool water as she gazed thoughtfully at the ripples. Her mind was a turbulent sea of emotions, guilt intertwined with a resolute determination. The choices she had made weighed heavily upon her, yet the goal she pursued remained steadfast in her heart. Chad approached quietly, his footsteps muffled by the cobblestone path. He hesitated for a moment, watching her in silent contemplation before finally speaking. "Maria," he called softly. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Chad. I thought you'd left." "I needed to see you," he replied, taking a tentative step closer. "We need to talk." She sighed inwardly, bracing herself for the conversation she knew was inevitable. "Very well. Let's sit." They settled on a stone bench beneath the shade of an old olive tree. The leaves rustled gently above them, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Chad took a deep breath, his eyes earnest as he looked at her. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything that's happened." "Chad," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Please, let me finish," he implored. "I can't keep going on like this, pretending that what we have is just a fleeting affair. I want more. I want a life with you." Maria held his gaze, her own eyes reflecting a mixture of sympathy and calculation. "You know our situation is complicated." "It doesn't have to be," he insisted. "We could leave here. Start fresh somewhere else. Just the two of us." She allowed a hint of sadness to color her expression. "And what of Hector? Our lives here? It's not so simple to just walk away." Chad reached out to take her hand, his touch warm and pleading. "Do you love him?" Maria hesitated, a deliberate pause that she knew would deepen his uncertainty. "Hector and I have a history. A bond that's not easily broken." "That's not an answer," he pressed gently. She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the distant hills. "Love can take many forms." "Do you love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned back to him, her eyes softening. "Chad, what we share is special. But life isn't just about passion. There are responsibilities, consequences." He tightened his grip on her hand. "I'm willing to face them. Are you?" Maria withdrew her hand slowly, a subtle gesture that conveyed both reluctance and finality. "I need time to think." "How much time?" he asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "I've poured my heart out to you, and I need to know where we stand." She stood, smoothing the folds of her dress. "I can't give you an answer right now. Please understand." Chad rose as well, a mixture of hope and desperation in his eyes. "Maria, I can't lose you." She offered a faint smile, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. "You haven't lost me. Trust me." Before he could respond, she turned and walked back toward the restaurant, leaving him standing alone beneath the olive tree. The weight of her touch lingered on his skin, but uncertainty gnawed at him. Inside, Maria navigated the familiar hallways of La Paloma, her footsteps echoing softly against the tiled floors. The scent of simmering sauces and freshly baked bread enveloped her, a comforting reminder of the world she had built. Yet, beneath the surface, her thoughts churned. She retreated to her private office, closing the door behind her. The room was a sanctuary of sorts, a space where she could confront her inner turmoil away from prying eyes. Maria sank into the plush armchair by the window, gazing out at the vibrant hues of the setting sun. Guilt tugged at her conscience, a persistent whisper that questioned the morality of her actions. She had manipulated Chad's affections, steering his emotions to serve her own purposes. But the stakes were high, and she believed the ends justified the means. Her deepest desire, to have a child, had driven her to lengths she hadn't anticipated. The thought of holding a baby in her arms, of completing the family she and Hector had longed for, fueled her resolve. Yet, the cost weighed heavily upon her soul. Maria closed her eyes, inhaling deeply as she attempted to quiet her restless mind. She envisioned the future she sought, a harmonious life with Hector, their child bringing newfound joy and purpose. Chad's role in this vision was transient, a necessary but temporary part of the journey. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her reverie. She straightened, smoothing her dress as she called out, "Come in." Elena, one of the waitresses, peeked her head inside. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Maria. I just wanted to let you know we finished setting up for tomorrow's event." Maria offered a grateful smile. "Thank you, Elena. You've been a tremendous help." "Is there anything else you need before I head out?" Elena asked kindly. "No, that will be all for tonight. Get some rest," Maria replied. As Elena closed the door, Maria's expression shifted back to one of contemplation. She knew what needed to be done. The uncertainty with Chad could not continue. It was time to bring matters to a close. Reaching for a pen and paper, she began to outline her plan. She needed to ensure their next encounter would be private, free from interruptions. The setting had to be just right, a place where she could guide the conversation and solidify her intentions. The old winery on the outskirts of town came to mind. It was a place seldom visited, especially on weekday evenings. Its secluded location and charming ambience made it the perfect backdrop for what she intended. Maria penned a note, carefully choosing her words. "Chad. Meet me at the old winery tomorrow evening at sunset. There's something important we need to discuss." Maria. Folding the note neatly, she decided she would slip it to him discreetly the following day. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Maria's bedroom, casting intricate patterns across the hardwood floor. She dressed with care, selecting a dress that was both elegant and understated. Her reflection in the mirror revealed a composed exterior, but the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes betrayed her inner conflict. Downstairs, she found Hector reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, a cup of steaming coffee in his hand. "Good morning," he greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning," she replied, pouring herself a cup of tea. He looked up, his gaze affectionate. "You seem well rested." "I feel ready to take on the day," she responded, returning his smile. "That's good to hear. We have that supplier meeting this afternoon. Will you be joining me?" She nodded. "Yes, of course." As they shared a quiet breakfast, Maria felt a pang of guilt. Hector's unwavering support and love only heightened the weight of her deception. She reminded herself of her ultimate goal, reaffirming her commitment to seeing it through. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with strokes of amber and rose, Maria made her way to the old winery. Vines twisted around wooden trellises, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. The air was tinged with the sweet scent of fermenting grapes and the earthy undertones of aged oak. She entered the main hall, its high ceilings and rustic charm evoking a sense of timelessness. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the tall windows, and the quiet was punctuated only by the distant call of a mourning dove. Chad arrived shortly after, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor. He paused upon seeing her, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension in his expression. "Maria," he greeted, his voice echoing gently in the open space. She turned to face him, offering a serene smile. "I'm glad you came." He approached slowly. "You said you had something important to discuss." She gestured toward a small table near the window, where 2 glasses and a bottle of wine awaited. "Let's sit." They settled across from each other, the fading light casting a warm glow over their features. Maria poured the wine, the rich crimson liquid swirling gracefully into the glasses. Chad watched her carefully. "Is this a celebration or a farewell?" he asked, attempting a light-hearted tone that didn't quite mask his underlying concern. Maria met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps a bit of both." He took a sip of the wine, savoring the complex flavors before setting the glass down. "I'm listening." She folded her hands in her lap, choosing her words with care. "I've thought a lot about what you said. About us. And about the future." "And?" he prompted, his eyes searching hers. "I can't deny the connection we share," she admitted softly. "You've brought a spark into my life that I hadn't felt in a long time." Hope flickered across his face. "Then let's embrace it. We can make this work." She held up a hand gently. "But there are realities we can't ignore. My life here with Hector, the responsibilities I have, they're not things I can simply abandon." "People make changes all the time," Chad argued. "We could build something new together." Maria reached across the table, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "I need you to trust me." He looked down at their touching hands. "I do trust you. But I need to know where I stand." She offered a reassuring smile. "Tonight, let's not worry about the future. Let's just enjoy the moment." Chad hesitated but ultimately nodded. "All right." They talked as the evening shadows lengthened, reminiscing about shared experiences and finding comfort in the familiarity of each other's company. Maria steered the conversation skillfully, keeping the atmosphere light while subtly reinforcing the intimacy between them. As darkness settled, she stood and moved toward the large window overlooking the vineyard. The moon had risen, casting a silvery sheen over the rolling hills. Chad joined her, the 2 standing side by side in quiet contemplation. "It's beautiful here," he remarked. "Yes, it is," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face her, lifting a hand to gently tilt her chin upward. "Maria, I..." She placed a finger against his lips, silencing him softly. "Shh. No words." Leaning in, she closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a tender kiss. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the warmth of their embrace and the soft rhythm of their intertwined breaths. Time slipped by unnoticed as they lost themselves in each other. When they finally parted, Maria rested her forehead against his, a hint of melancholy in her eyes. "Stay with me a while longer," she whispered. "Always," he replied, pulling her close. As the night wore on, they remained wrapped in each other's arms, the quiet of the winery enveloping them like a protective cocoon. Eventually, Maria pulled away gently. "I should go. It's getting late." Chad nodded, a trace of reluctance in his expression. "Will I see you tomorrow?" She offered a soft smile. "Of course. We'll talk more then." They parted ways outside the winery, Chad watching as she disappeared down the path toward town. A sense of contentment mingled with lingering uncertainty filled him, but he held on to the hope that their relationship was moving toward a deeper commitment. Maria walked steadily, her mind focused on the steps that lay ahead. She knew the risks of her actions but remained convinced of their necessity. The trap was set, and all that remained was to await the unfolding of events. Returning home, she found Hector already asleep. She slipped quietly into bed beside him, the familiar scent of their shared life surrounding her. Lying in the darkness, Maria allowed herself a moment of reflection. The path she had chosen was fraught with moral complexities, but she believed it would ultimately lead to the fulfillment of her deepest longing. As sleep finally claimed her, Maria dreamed of a future where her desires were realized, a harmonious blend of love, family, and the life she had meticulously crafted. Outside, the town of San Elroy slumbered peacefully, unaware of the intricate web of love and lies woven by one of its own. Chapter 9: The Desert's Embrace. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a tapestry of fiery oranges and deep purples across the sky. The desert surrounding San Elroy transformed under the twilight, its vast expanse taking on an otherworldly beauty. Maria stood at the edge of town, her silhouette outlined against the fading light. She glanced back briefly, ensuring no one had followed, before proceeding down the dusty path that led to the secluded adobe cottage they had chosen for their rendezvous. Chad arrived shortly after, his footsteps muffled by the soft sand. He spotted Maria waiting beneath a lone mesquite tree, her dark hair flowing freely over her shoulders. The gentle breeze carried the subtle scent of jasmine from her, enveloping him as he drew near. "You came," she said softly, a hint of relief in her voice. "Always," he replied, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." She offered a faint smile. "Some things are worth the risk." They entered the cottage, its interior bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Shadows danced along the walls, the flickering flames casting an intimate ambience. A simple table stood in the center of the room, adorned with a bottle of wine and 2 crystal glasses. The atmosphere was serene, a world away from the complexities that awaited them beyond these walls. Chad poured the wine, handing a glass to Maria. "To us," he toasted, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "To this moment," she amended, clinking her glass lightly against his. They sipped in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Chad set his glass down, reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "You're even more beautiful in this light," he murmured. Maria looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of vulnerability and resolve. "You've always known how to make me feel seen," she replied. He took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "Because you are. To me, you're everything." She averted her gaze briefly, emotions flickering across her features. "Chad, tonight. Let's forget about everything else. Just for a little while." He nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I'd like that." They moved closer, the space between them diminishing until there was nothing left but the shared rhythm of their breaths. Chad leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, their lips met in a tender kiss, a gentle exploration that deepened as they gave into the emotions they'd kept restrained for so long. Maria's hands rested against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. Chad wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer as the world outside faded from existence. "Tell me about your dreams," she whispered. He gazed at her thoughtfully. "They've all become intertwined with you. I can't imagine a future without us together." She offered a wistful smile. "The future is a delicate thing." "It doesn't have to be," he replied earnestly. "We can shape it, make it what we want." Maria's eyes held a distant sadness. "Sometimes, no matter how much we wish otherwise, certain paths are closed to us." Chad studied her expression, concern creeping into his voice. "Are you having doubts?" She hesitated before answering. "Not about how I feel. But realities have a way of intruding." He reached up to cup her face gently. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." She closed her eyes briefly, leaning into his touch. "Perhaps." A comfortable silence enveloped them once more. Outside, the wind whispered through the desert, a soothing melody that underscored the intimacy of their surroundings. Maria stood and moved toward the window, gazing out at the blanket of stars that stretched endlessly above. Chad joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's beautiful out here," he remarked. "It is," she agreed softly. "The desert has a way of making you feel both insignificant and infinite all at once." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "With you, I feel like anything is possible." She turned to face him, a complex mix of emotions in her eyes. "Chad, there's something I want to tell you." "What is it?" he asked, his attention fully on her. Before she could speak, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over Chad. He blinked, trying to clear the haze that clouded his vision. I don't feel so good," he mumbled. Maria's expression shifted subtly. "Are you all right?" she asked, her tone measured. He pressed a hand to his forehead. "I'm not sure. Everything feels off." "Maybe you should sit down," she suggested, guiding him back toward the sofa. Chad's legs felt unsteady, the room spinning ever so slightly. "I don't understand what's happening," he said, confusion evident in his voice. Maria knelt beside him, her gaze steady. "Just relax. It might be the wine. Perhaps it was stronger than we thought." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the sensation only intensified. Sounds around him became muffled, the edges of his vision blurring. "Something's wrong," he whispered, a hint of panic creeping in. "Shh," Maria soothed, placing a calming hand on his shoulder. "Everything will be all right." Chad's eyelids grew heavy, the effort to keep them open becoming too great. "Maria," he murmured, his voice trailing off. She watched as he slipped into unconsciousness, her expression unreadable. The soft glow of the remaining candle cast long shadows across the room, the once cozy atmosphere now tinged with an eerie stillness. The sounds of the desert night faded into the background as Chad's awareness drifted. His thoughts fragmented, snippets of memories and emotions swirling in a disjointed tapestry. The warmth of Maria's touch, the taste of the wine, the distant call of a coyote, all melded into a fading echo. Darkness enveloped him, a velvety abyss that erased all sensation. There was a fleeting moment of weightlessness, as if he were suspended between worlds. The faint flicker of light at the periphery of his consciousness dimmed, leaving him submerged in complete silence. Maria stood slowly, her gaze fixed on Chad's still form. She reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, her fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Taking a deep breath, she straightened and began to extinguish the candles one by one, plunging the room into darkness. Outside, the stars continued their eternal vigil, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding beneath them. The cool night air whispered secrets known only to the desert, its vast expanse stretching endlessly in every direction. Maria stepped out into the night, closing the door softly behind her. She paused, casting one last glance back at the cottage before making her way down the path. Her footsteps were deliberate, each step carrying her further from the choices made within those walls. As she walked, the weight of her actions settled upon her, a heavy cloak of inevitability. The horizon ahead remained shrouded in darkness, the path uncertain. Yet, she moved forward with a resolute determination, the faint glow of distant lights guiding her back toward the town. In the silence that followed, the desert reclaimed its solitude. The moon cast a pale light over the landscape, illuminating the contours of the sand dunes and the rugged outlines of distant mesas. Time seemed to stand still, the night holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Chad remained unconscious, his fate hanging in the balance as the world around him continued its quiet rotation. The boundaries between dreams and reality blurred, leaving him adrift in a place where time held no meaning. Maria reached the edge of town, the familiar streets welcoming her like an old friend. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the chill of the night seeping into her bones. With each step, she rehearsed the words she would say, the explanations she would offer. The facade she had carefully constructed was fragile, but she was committed to seeing her plan through to its conclusion. The implications of her actions loomed large, but she pushed the doubts aside, focusing instead on the goal that had driven her to this point. Chapter 10: Revelation Under the Stars. A biting chill clung to the night air as Chad slowly regained consciousness. The coarse texture of sand pressed against his cheek, and the vast expanse of the desert stretched out around him, illuminated by a collection of stars scattered across the inky sky. His head throbbed with a dull ache, and his limbs felt heavy, as if anchored to the earth beneath him. Disoriented, Chad pushed himself up onto his elbows, grains of sand slipping through his fingers. The last thing he remembered was being with Maria, the warmth of her touch, the softness of her voice. But now, the cold silence of the desert enveloped him, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. As his vision cleared, he became aware of a figure standing a short distance away. Hector. The older man stood tall and composed, the moonlight casting sharp shadows across his face. In his hands, he held a shotgun, its barrel reflecting a sliver of pale light. Chad's heart jolted. "Hector?" he croaked, his voice rough and unsteady. "What's going on?" Hector regarded him with an unreadable expression, his eyes reflecting a mix of melancholy and resolve. "You're awake," he observed calmly. Struggling to his feet, Chad swayed slightly, his senses still dulled. "Why am I here? What's happening?" Hector took a measured step forward. "I imagine you're feeling quite confused," he said, his tone even. "But there's much we need to discuss." A surge of apprehension coursed through Chad. He glanced around, the realization of their isolation sinking in. "Where's Maria?" "She's safe," Hector replied. "This conversation is between you and me." Chad's gaze flickered to the shotgun before meeting Hector's eyes. "If this is about Maria and me, I can explain." Hector raised a hand to silence him. "There's no need for explanations. I'm well aware of what's transpired between you two." The weight of Hector's calm demeanor unsettled Chad more than anger would have. "I never meant for things to happen this way," Chad began, his voice edged with desperation. "I care about her deeply." A faint smile touched Hector's lips, devoid of warmth. "I'm sure you do. Maria has a way of inspiring strong feelings in people." Chad took a cautious step forward. "Please, let's talk about this. We don't have to." "Do you love her?" Hector interjected, his gaze piercing. Caught off guard, Chad hesitated. "Yes," he admitted. "I do." Hector nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "Then perhaps you can understand the lengths one might go to for someone they love." Chad swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" Turning his gaze to the horizon, where the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Hector spoke thoughtfully. "Maria has always wanted a child. It's a longing that's weighed heavily on her, on both of us." Confusion knitted Chad's brow. "I don't understand." Hector met his eyes once more. "I'm unable to give her the family she desires," he confessed, a hint of vulnerability slipping through his stoic facade. "We've prayed, consulted doctors, but fate has its own plans." Realization began to dawn on Chad, a cold knot forming in his stomach. "You knew about us," he whispered. "From the beginning," Hector confirmed. "It was necessary." Chad shook his head, disbelief mingling with a sense of betrayal. "Necessary? You used me?" Hector's expression remained steady. "Maria's faith is unyielding. She would never have broken her vows without encouragement." A wave of anger surged within Chad. "You manipulated her? Or did she manipulate me?" "Does it matter?" Hector asked quietly. "The result is the same." Chad's mind raced, fragments of past interactions snapping into place with newfound clarity. "You wanted this to happen," he said, his voice tinged with incredulity. Hector sighed softly. "I wanted to give my wife the happiness she deserves. Even if it meant sacrificing certain principles." "At my expense," Chad retorted, bitterness seeping into his words. "You're not the only one who took risks," Hector countered. "We all play the roles we're given." Chad glanced again at the shotgun, a spike of fear piercing through his confusion. "What happens now?" A long pause followed, the silence stretching taut between them. "I owe you my gratitude," Hector finally said. "You've given Maria hope, a chance at the family she's always desired." Chad's pulse quickened. "And what about me?" Hector's eyes hardened subtly. "Your part in this is concluded." A chill ran down Chad's spine. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid it's the only way," Hector replied, his tone devoid of malice yet firm. "The secret must be kept." Panic flared within Chad. "People will notice if I disappear. They'll ask questions." "You're a drifter," Hector observed. "No ties, no roots. It's not uncommon for men like you to move on without a word." Chad took a step back, his muscles tensing. "I won't let you do this." Hector raised the shotgun slightly, a measured gesture that stopped Chad in his tracks. "I take no pleasure in this," he said. "But it's a necessary conclusion." Desperation clawed at Chad's chest. "Hector, please. We can find another way. I won't say anything, I swear." The older man regarded him with a hint of sorrow. "It's not a matter of trust. It's about ensuring Maria's happiness, free from scandal or doubt." Chad's mind raced, searching for an escape. The vastness of the desert offered little solace, a stark, unforgiving landscape stretching endlessly around them. "She won't forgive you for this," Chad warned, hoping to sway Hector. If you love her, you won't do this. Hector's gaze softened slightly. Everything I've done is out of love for her. One day, perhaps you'll understand. The first rays of sunlight breached the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. Chad's options dwindled as the reality of his situation set in. At least tell me she cares, Chad pleaded, a final grasp at solace. That it wasn't all a lie. Hector considered him for a moment. Her feelings are her own. But know that your involvement has given her a gift beyond measure. Defeat weighed heavily on Chad's shoulders. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he murmured. I believe you, Hector replied quietly. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant call of a morning bird. Chad closed his eyes briefly, a myriad of emotions swirling within him: fear, regret, a lingering ache for what might have been. Hector, he began softly, if you ever cared for me at all. Enough, Hector interrupted gently. It's time. Chad opened his eyes to see Hector leveling the shotgun, his expression resolute yet tinged with sadness. May you find peace, Hector whispered. In that suspended moment, Chad felt a strange calm wash over him. The warmth of the rising sun touched his face, and the vast sky above seemed to stretch infinitely, a canvas of endless possibilities now out of reach. A sharp sound echoed across the desert, startling a flock of birds into flight. The reverberation faded quickly, swallowed by the open expanse. Hector stood still, the weight of his actions settling upon him. He lowered the shotgun slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun continued its ascent, indifferent to the lives entwined beneath its glow. For a long while, he remained there, the solitude of the desert wrapping around him like a shroud. Thoughts of Maria filled his mind, their shared dreams, the sacrifices made. He hoped that, in time, the choices he had made would bring her the happiness she so deeply deserved. Turning away, Hector began the solitary journey back to San Elroy. Each step was measured, the quiet crunch of sand underfoot the only accompaniment to his thoughts. As the town came into view, bathed in the gentle light of morning, Hector steeled himself for the days ahead. There were arrangements to be made, questions to anticipate. But for now, his focus was on Maria, on the life they would build together, the future that awaited them. The desert behind him remained silent, the secrets it held buried beneath its sands. The vast expanse stretched on, an eternal witness to the passage of time and the depths of human resolve. Entering their home, Hector found Maria seated at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face for answers. It's done, he said simply. A subtle tension left her shoulders, and she nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered. He moved to sit across from her, the unspoken weight of their shared secret hanging heavy in the air. Are you all right? He asked gently. She met his gaze, a myriad of emotions flickering in her eyes. I will be, she replied. We both will. Hector reached across the table to take her hand, their fingers intertwining. We'll get through this together, he assured her. Outside, the town of San Elroy bustled with the beginnings of a new day. Children laughed as they ran down the streets, merchants opened their shops, and the aroma of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Life continued its relentless pace, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded in its midst. Chapter 11: Joyful Announcements. The morning sun bathed San Elroy in a warm, golden glow, casting a radiant light over the adobe homes and cobblestone streets. Bougainvillea vines draped over balconies, their vibrant magenta blossoms swaying gently in the soft breeze. The town was alive with a hum of activity, a wonderful energy that seemed to mirror the joy in Maria's heart. Word of Maria's pregnancy had spread quickly, carried on the wings of excited whispers and shared smiles. Neighbors stopped by with freshly baked goods and handcrafted gifts, their eyes alight with genuine happiness for the couple. La Paloma became a hub of celebration, patrons offering heartfelt congratulations as they enjoyed their meals. One afternoon, as Maria arranged a bouquet of sunflowers by the restaurant's entrance, Elena approached with a gleeful grin. Maria, you won't believe it. The town council has decided to hold a fiesta in your honor this weekend. Maria turned, surprise and delight mingling in her expression. A fiesta? That's so generous of them. Elena nodded enthusiastically. Everyone wants to share in your joy. You've both given so much to this community, it's our way of giving back. Touched by the gesture, Maria felt a swell of emotion. That's incredibly kind. Please, extend my gratitude to the council. As the days passed, preparations for the celebration filled the town with a festive spirit. Colorful banners were strung across the plaza, and musicians rehearsed lively tunes that would soon echo through the streets. The aroma of simmering chilies and sweet confections wafted from every corner, promising a feast to remember. On the eve of the fiesta, Father Miguel visited La Paloma with a special request. Maria, Hector, he began, his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles, I would be honored if you would allow us to hold a blessing ceremony during Sunday's service. A child is a gift from God, and it's fitting we celebrate this blessing together. Hector exchanged a glance with Maria, his hand finding hers. We would be humbled, he replied. Thank you, Father. Maria nodded in agreement, though a flicker of apprehension stirred within her. Yes, thank you, she added softly. Father Miguel clasped his hands together. Wonderful. The congregation is eager to share in your joy. I'll make the arrangements. That night, as the stars blanketed the sky in a glittering arrangement, Maria and Hector sat on their porch, the gentle strumming of a guitar drifting from a neighbor's home. Hector gazed out into the night, a contented smile playing on his lips. Can you believe how the town has rallied around us? He mused. It's overwhelming, in the best possible way. Maria rested her head on his shoulder. They've always been like family, she agreed. Yet, beneath her words, a subtle tension lingered. The weight of their shared secret pressed lightly against her conscience. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Are you happy? She hesitated for a heartbeat before responding. I am, she affirmed, squeezing his hand. The end.